Welcome to Catholic Sunday Scriptures in Context, and welcome back to Sundays in Ordinary Time. We have just been through the Easter season, and then Pentecost Sunday, Trinity Sunday, and Corpus Christi, and we finally return to Ordinary Time. We are celebrating the 13th Sunday in Ordinary Time this weekend. To remind you about the plan for a Sunday in Ordinary Time, the first reading comes from the Hebrew Scriptures or the Old Testament, and is always chosen as a commentary on the Gospel. The second reading comes from the New Testament, or the Christian Scriptures, and is just a continuous reading of whatever letter of Paul or one of the other apostles that we have until that letter is complete. And during this year C, our Gospel will always be from the Gospel of Luke. So the theme of this week's readings is that from the first book of Kings and the Gospel of Luke focus on discipleship and following so as to learn from the Master. And the reading from St. Paul's letter to the Galatians is about living in freedom under grace, not under the law. So our first reading is from the first book of Kings, chapter 19. And it is the call of Elisha to follow Elijah. And let me give you a little background to that. So Elijah had, right before this reading, had outdone the prophets of Baal. They had a competition to see which god was more powerful, the god of the Jewish people, the god of Elijah, or Baal. And Elijah won, and he killed many of the prophets. The queen of that time was Jezebel, who was a great devotee of Baal, and she wanted revenge on Elijah. So she started hunting down Elijah, and Elijah fled for his life. Eventually he flees into a cave, and then there's that famous story where he sees a storm and God is not in the storm. He sees an earthquake and God is not in the earthquake, but then there's a gentle breeze and he bows down because he feels the presence of God. And after that experience, Elijah asks to step down. He's just worn out by all the challenges that come from Jezebel and the others. And so in today's reading, Elijah is instructed to anoint Elisha. Elisha, as we can see, is a farmer, and he's plowing the ground with his 12 yoke of oxen. There were 2 oxen in every yoke, so there are 24 oxen here, which is a phenomenal number and either shows the wealth of Elisha or the wealth of his community. Elisha accepts this calling after the cloak is thrown over his shoulders. He slaughters his oxen, burns his equipment, feeds his family and community, and follows Elijah. And the destruction of his equipment shows that he is fully committed to being a disciple of Elijah. Elijah's name means "my God is the Lord," and Elisha's name means "my God saves." So the word El there is the word for God. Sometimes he was known as El Shaddai, the mountain God, but El always gives us the idea of God. And as I mentioned, the cloak was the sign of Elijah's office. Our second reading today is from Galatians. And again, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is a continuous reading of that. And in today's reading, Paul tells the people that they are set free from the law. And the genesis of that is that some of the Jewish Christians had told the Gentiles that they needed to practice the Mosaic law in order to be Christian. And Paul disagrees with that he sees the law as a burden or as an obstacle to salvation rather than the fulfillment of it. And he uses the word yoke, and when he's talking about a yoke, he's referring to the Mosaic law. And he tells the Christians that they have been set free from the law for the sake of freedom, and that freedom is not a license to do whatever you want. And in what he means by that is you can't just self-gratify your flesh. There were some people who thought that by joining Christianity, they didn't have to be bound by any laws. And Paul tells them actually their obligation is more severe now than it was before. So living in the flesh versus living in the spirit. And this is always the constant struggle throughout Paul's writings and throughout the communities that he meets. There was this constant influence of the pagan religions who had sort of sacred prostitution and many of other things that we would consider inordinate. And Paul tells them that they are called to serve others and that love is the fulfillment of the law. You are not set free from one form of bondage to be subjected to another. And so these Christians are called to be free, living under grace, so that they can grow in love. And lastly, our gospel today is about discipleship. It's from Luke chapter 9. And in this part of the gospel, we have an extraordinary section that begins with Luke using material that is not found in any of the other gospels as well. And it starts with Jesus setting his face towards Jerusalem, meaning that he's determined to fulfill his prophetic role, because it is in Jerusalem where all the prophets are killed. And so for this story, it starts off with his encounter with the Samaritans. And the Samaritans and Jews were not on good terms for both religious and political reasons. Jesus himself did not scorn the Samaritans, as we see in the story of the Good Samaritan, which will be in this section of the gospel. For the Jewish people, Jerusalem was the holy city, but for the Samaritans, it was a rival city. The Samaritans had their own temple that had been destroyed, and the temple was found on Mount Gerizim, and so they would not welcome anyone who was heading to Jerusalem. Throughout Luke's gospel, he always compares Jesus to Elijah, and that is the case here in some of the writing. In that wording where John and James asked to call down fire from heaven, this is what Elijah did when the armies of the king were going against him. And James and John want to use their new powers to punish, and they are reprimanded. That's not why God made them. It's not why Jesus made them disciples. They're supposed to use their powers for healing, not for destruction. And Jesus refers to the word taken up, and it's the same word that's used for Elijah when he gets on the chariot to go to heaven, and it's the word that's used in the ascension. In this idea of discipleship, the commitment to Jesus must be total. Discipleship has cost. It may be homelessness. There is an immediacy to it. You can't delay. You can't say, I have other things to do before that, because so many people need to hear this message of the good news of forgiveness and healing. And when you become a disciple, the Christians become your new family. And Luke's Jesus calls his disciples to detachment from anyone and from anything. This idea of discipleship is a life fulfilling commitment, and nothing else should get in the way. Please, again, pray for Ukraine, pray for peace, and pray for the refugees. And thank you for listening to this presentation. And if you think it can help anyone, please pass it on. Thank you very much.